This episode of the Policing Matters podcast is sponsored by ESOF by Miller Mendel. Learn more about streamlining your agency's crucial pre-employment background investigation process with ESOF at www.esoph.com. That's www.esoph.com. One of the top issues that remains a priority and yet a mystery outside the ranks of sworn officers and scholars is the police use of force. My guest today is Joshua Coleman, Vice President of the California Force Instructors Association. Hey, welcome to Policing Matters on policeone.com. I'm your host, Jim Dudley. And yeah, we're going to be talking about use of force and the role it plays almost every day in policing and some of the challenges that we've had since 2020. Well, hey, welcome to Policing Matters, Joshua Coleman.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invite. Can't wait to get into the meat and potatoes of the discussion.
Yeah, we're going to get into it. So tell us first about the California Force Instructors Association. What do you do there? What are the priorities there?
So the California Force Instructors Association is a relatively new police advocacy group that cropped up about 5 years ago. Little longer if you count our infancy, but when we really truly became an association that was worthy of hearing about, we've been doing it for about 5 years. And so the idea really was that the single most critical incident, or I'm sorry, the single most critical issue in law enforcement, both for police and the public, is use of force. But there was no association in California that dealt with these issues. So, cops have been doing this work for a long time, long as I've been in the business, which is about 18, 20 years. CNOA is something that you're urged to join. As soon as I came in the door, CNOA was something that I was urged to join. PORAC from the larger legislative level, CPOA, California, CHIA, you name it. There's all these different associations that deal with all these different issues, but there was never an association that deals specifically with use of force. And so what we started seeing is 2013, Mike Brown happens. 2020, you have George Floyd happening. All of a sudden, you have this big groundswell, grassroots effort from both the public and legislative, representatives to start changing use of force issues within California. And no big group or advocacy group from an expert level was able to, be in those rooms. You have police administrators that are invited to the conversations, and just individuals that are invited to the conversation, but not a larger body that kind of sets best practices and does the research and does those things. So that's kind of where we got started. It's really simple. We're about training and advocacy. So from the officer level down to the end user is who we think about, and it really is. We say this on a regular basis, but it's the guy in the middle of the night, the guy or gal in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, having to make a decision that we care about. We also, on top of that, you cannot remove the community from that. You have to care about what the community thinks about what you do. And so we're very, very cognizant of that. And we invite, different people from different workspaces to come and be a part of these conversations so that we can also learn more. Because, we can talk till we're blue in the face about how we think what we think we're doing is right. But if people look at it a certain way and think a certain thing of it, then that doesn't help us. So we have to try to make sure that we're all on the same page and all speaking the same language. So that's the training aspect of it. From the advocacy standpoint of it, there are just flat out certain things that are out there from a narrative standpoint that are untrue about what police do and how we do it. And that really affects us, because it ultimately ends in bad legislation, and bad policy. That bad legislation and bad policy ultimately affects the end user out on the street when he has to make decisions. So the loss of the carotid is the big one, right? The carotid hold it was an agency by agency thing, and it kind of is dependent on who ran your agency and how they felt about it. But the reality is that it's the most humane police tactic to bring a conflict to a peaceful resolution without injury to the officer and injury to the suspect. And that was just taken away from us with a stroke of the pen. So that's something that we would like to see come back. Issues like that are really what we got our hands in.
Yeah, and that was on my list of questions to ask you is about the carotid exactly because when I came into the field, 40 years ago, the carotid was taught at the academy. We had to experience getting knocked out on a mat in a gym by each other or peer
Yeah.
in training and applied the right way. Just as you say, the most humane, it ends the fight almost immediately, and
Mhm.
you reduce the possibility of harm to the offender or combatant and the officer. And then, 15 seconds later, you're in handcuffs, they're revived, you get an ambulance to come by, check them out, make sure they're okay, and you're good to go. And you're right with a stroke of a pen, but I think, some agencies, some major agencies, New York and LA, most notably, got rid of their carotid even before 2020, before Ferguson or before George Floyd. And, but George Floyd was the trigger. And
Yeah.
ironically, it wasn't the carotid used on George Floyd. It was some other maneuver of a knee on the back, shoulder, neck area that caused the
Maximal restraint, I think is what they call it, the maximal restraint technique.
yeah, and they call it
Yeah.
that caused the most uproar. And so as you say, hundreds of agencies and some states outright prohibited the use of the carotid. And we hear from people outside of law enforcement saying, they want science involved in policing. Well,
Yeah.
yes, bring it, right? And I've had some great experts, Sergeant Jamie Borden, force science expert, Sid Heel,
Yeah.
rest in peace to Sid Heel. What an outstanding expert on force from LA sheriffs. And we talked a little bit about carotid and how important it is as a gap level of force between hands and firearms. And yet I don't think the public understands that. So when you talk about advocacy, I think it's great because a lot of sitting chiefs and sheriffs won't stand before the public and argue about use of force. And so sometimes it's either an organization or people like me outside, retired. No, I won't get fired if I talk about something controversial about
Yeah.
force. But how do we
Yeah.
involve those other people in to help fight the fight?
Well, I think well, one, it has to come from, you have the decisions that are being made have to be made from a standpoint of being educated first. It's funny, you mentioned a lot of different names in that, and what you were talking about. Jamie Borden is a member of CALFIA. He presents at CALFIA every year almost. He really just recently presented in one of our Zoom meetings and was talking about his recent book that he wrote. Phenomenal guy, very, very educated person. And that's really what our association is about bringing together the people who are, we call them force nerds. That's like our little colloquial term, but it really truly is a science, right? And it's it's a phenomenological science, meaning something that you have to experience through your time as a police officer to really know. There aren't agencies or there aren't universities yet really that are doing studies on the best physical control methods to bring a person under arrest. We would love for that to happen in the future. There are universities that are completely dedicated to sports science. There are universities that are dedicated to making people better decision makers from an athletic standpoint, making NFL quarterbacks better, studying F1 drivers, things like that. But there are really no universities that are studying objectively and without bias how police officers do what they do and what we experience, right? We have a working police officer in a pretty up tempo part of the United States has more conflict experience under his belt, 10, 15, 20 years in more fights with humans than most MMA fighters, right? Like an MMA fighter, you're training for not training doesn't count, right? Like the real thing. These guys are having, 20, 30 fights in their career, right? But you could be a police officer and you could have 20, 30 knockdown, drag out fights in 10 years and you're still working up until, you retire. So we would like to bring interest from a scientific standpoint, from an evidence-based standpoint. I know Jason Potts, a friend of mine, is I think he's the president now of the American Society for Evidence-Based Policing, and like making those connections so that we can start bringing the science into what we do, so that we can educate the people who make the decisions. Because going back to the carotid, that decision to use the carotid as a negotiate, and I know this because I have a personal conversation with someone in Porak, I won't mention his name, um, who told me that the carotid was an easy give up. How often do you really use it, right? And that may come from a person who works for an agency where that person that individual agency had it a little higher on the force options, matrix. Well, if you work for an agency where it's still kind of in that intermediate area with OC and taser and things like that, that's a huge loss. Like you said, it's a gap between physical control and potential lethal force, and not having anything in between that's as effective. And that's the problem, is it's not that the carotid is the end all be all. It's that OC is highly ineffective. It gets on me, it gets on them. But as soon as it comes out and starts getting sprayed, police officers go running, lose control of the suspect. The taser, although the taser 10 is now, I'm just seeing this thing. We just got it at our agency. That's a pretty wild device. To see how far the taser has come from when it started to where it is now. I wouldn't even be able to imagine that, 18 years ago, but it still has limitations, right? Like there's a video floating around on the internet of somebody some gal, I think, is chasing a guy, and she shoots this dude with a taser five, 6 times, trying to get a connection before it's effective. Whereas the carotid, when you put it on and you get it on correctly, it's gonna render someone unconscious pretty quickly. And then when they go unconscious, being able to get them in handcuffs without resistance is very, very easy. So it's something that has to happen. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But it is part of our work. It's priority one for us to be able to work to get that back. What it's going to take, though, however, is that we have to start, now that we have the numbers, we have to start leveraging our community partners, and we have to start working on communicating with our legislators to try to see if we can make some movement that way through the government. Because the only way to get it back is through some sort of political action, which is the next goal of ours.
Yeah, well, I think you have a much better chance in 2025 than you did in 2021, 22, 23, 24.
Yeah.
So good luck with that. I'm with you. And you just said a lot right there, and unpacking it. San Francisco PD, we've never had a taser, so we've never had the luxury of a taser. And the idea of losing the carotid was a real gap for us, because I mean, I used it a dozen times or more myself in a short period of time in my early career. Some of the other things that you mentioned, yeah, the Taser 10, I've fired that at shows at Axon, and yeah, what a great tool, and the range is incredible. So you're talking about some broad issues. How do you interact with law enforcement officers and other states? Are they coming to you? Are you putting out surveys? What's behind your priorities?
So we weren't really focused on law enforcement in other states. Our primary focus was California. So the story of CALFIA goes, the association started as Orange County Training, Orange County Training Officers Association, and it was like 15 people. That Tracy McKenzie is the founding father. Tracy McKenzie, Jeff Wright, who's a lieutenant with Ontario, Brandon Sontag, and the whole host of other guys that were involved early on. and they just kind of wanted to get together and share lesson plans and share ideas and talk about use of force together. And then it grew to CALFIA, Force Instructors Association. And that's how I got involved. Is I was down teaching a class in Newport Beach and got to meet Tracy, who was the president at that time. And then we just expanded north, and we've just been expanding over, since then, right? Well, with that expansion, we found that unintentionally, we found that our association fills a void, there's a need for it. And agents, different officers from different agencies across the nation have just been signing up for us. So we tell them, oftentimes, like, hey, sorry, like the things we're working on, like we're working with Post right now on a, or not, we're not working now, but like at the time, it would say we're working with Post on a positional asphyxia micro course. Like, I know that this doesn't apply to your state, but this is what we're working on. They're like, that's fine. Like the information that we're getting through the newsletter, the information that we're getting through the Zoom meetings, and the information that we get in the conference is all worth it. So, and what they find is that these trends tend to come out of California and then go across the nation. So, it's been fun. We also have members in Canada as well, which is really wild. At our last conference, we had a couple Canadian, I think one or two Canadian Mounties that came down from Canada, and they just one of them, I think, wrote a book and was down there, and he was kind of sharing his book that he wrote. And It's really cool to watch it happen. People are really excited about it. We've really just kind of united all of the every department has, a handful of people who are really, really, really immersed in this subject and know a lot about it. And it's been very cool to connect all those people together.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So, shifting a little bit to from training and advising and trying to figure out these strategies post deadly force incident. So the deadly force incident occurs. We often see a quick reaction in the media, from the public, from legislators, not always from the agency or the chief or the sheriff. Maybe a quick PIO will say, it's under investigation, we'll get back to you. How should we be responding? Are you giving any kind of guidance to agencies to say, hey, here's some basic info you've got to put out that, our force guidelines say X, Y, Z. I think so often, especially with the media, uh, we hear these reports and cops know, inside baseball says, well, heck, that's the policy. And
Yeah,
when people do this, we respond with this. But
right,
that doesn't always make its way to that newscast. What should
right.
we be doing different?
Well, right now, you and I are sitting on a podcast talking about police issues, right? If you went back in time, not even long ago, if you just went back 10 years ago and uh, said, hey, you and I work together in an agency, and we find out, Bill has a podcast. Culturally, that's something that we shut down. Culturally, we're like, well, what are you talking about? Why are you out there talking about police stuff, man? Like oh, you want to put yourself in front of the camera, oh, you like the limelight, whatever it may be. Like we have these little agency maxims that we like to kick out and kind of shame people for speaking on police issues, right? Well,
Right.
how has that worked out well for us? It has not worked out well for us, right? Um, I say this a lot, but when I was in college, Facebook was just beginning. Um, it started off as just a college social media platform to connect college students, and then it kind of grew from there. And I didn't have an account and I didn't want an account, but I watched very quickly as it grew in popularity and it became the staple method of communication for people, right, via the internet. It took 20 years for law enforcement agencies to start getting Facebook accounts. 20 years. Because I'm sure at some point somebody went, hey, you know what, maybe we should do this. And people are like, no, 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 we're not doing that. Right. Like
Right, right, right.
that's scary. Putting information out on the internet and making posts and talking about what we do scares us. A press release is no different. If you look, you don't have to look far, but if you start trying to research good press releases from across the nation, you can point to a few big personalities across the nation that are good at it and that do it well. But by and large, most agencies are not about sharing their business in the public. And it comes and it's for a good reason. One, we come from a culture where we're the police. We don't have to tell you what we're doing, right? That's when I came in the business. That's very much how things were. It's like, we're the police. We don't have to tell
Yeah.
you what we're doing.
Yeah.
Then it became, well, what we say can get us in trouble because you have to be very careful with your words. And now we're at the stage where we're behind the curve now, and people want us to be transparent, but we're very, very resistant to the public speaking part of it. I work with a lot of different dudes. I have a lot of friends that are captains, chiefs, lieutenants in different agencies, and public speaking is something that cops are very, very leery of. We just are, right? Like, let's start from the beginning, that we have diminished First Amendment rights, right off the bat. We have a diminished First Amendment right, so there's not a lot of protection for us to speak out on things. I think that with a critical incident that is sensationalized, it is best policy, it's best practice, and I think it's been proven since Mike Brown, that you have to get out in front of it and you have to tell the story. It's not about creating our narrative. It's just about telling the truth. All of these facts and details are going to come out. The only thing that I think people should be considerate of is the Sixth Amendment. So you should be careful to not affect this person's due process rights. And that also includes the officer, except in California, they're allowed to release body camera, which could be used against you, but whatever. Aside from the Sixth Amendment issues and due process issues, we should be getting as many of the details out as possible and telling the story. And that doesn't just mean, I've also been the victim of this. I've been in 5 OISs in my career, and I've seen the press being done badly, and I've seen the press stuff being handled well, right? And so I think it's just again, it's just practice, education. These things don't come around; they're infrequent events. You don't think it's going to happen in your town, and then it does. So, I don't know if there's PIO schools out there that are really good, like good media handling schools or PR firms that are willing to start teaching, police managers and police PIOs, like how to sit and speak with people. But again, you know what? I think it's kind of like when you're a rookie and you're brand new, and you kind of avoid breaking character on car stops and interactions. But then as you progress through your career, you realize you're like, I can just be a regular human with these people. Like, I'm just gonna be a regular human. Yes, I'll talk to you about my wife. Yes, I'll tell you I have kids. Like, there's no boogeyman gonna creep around in my bush because I told you I had kids. And so, then you start to see that your police interactions go better. I think that the media stuff is very, very similar. We just need to be regular people. Just show people that we're regular people and tell them what happened. And then the rest will be what it is. The lawyers will fight that out.
Yeah, and speaking of lawyers, I know the hesitancy from chiefs and sheriffs has always been, well, if I say something that's wrong, we're going to get sued, we're going to lose a ton of money. You're already losing a ton of money. I mean,
Already.
if you take any incident, and a lot of them go like this, individual with mental health issues in a mental health crisis running around X, put location in, naked, half clothed, armed with a weapon, no weapon, officers attempt to subdue him. 5 officers have to hold him down, put the handcuffs on,
Yeah.
get him in the radio car. He dies.
Yeah.
And then the autopsy later, toxicology shows all this stuff on board.
Yeah.
And whether before you even go to court, we're settling for 4, 5, 6, $8 million. So
Yeah.
that shouldn't enter into it. I think we need to come up, with a post class that goes across states that say, here's a template for what you need to say to either say we're within policy or we're not, or this is our policy and we're still investigating it. To say nothing invites that other narrative. And that other narrative, as you know, you keep mentioning Mike Brown, the Ferguson incident.
Yeah.
We know that false narrative was out there for years. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Still
ask,
is.
I ask
Still is.
students, yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
now, who believes in the hands up, don't shoot, and they, throw their hands up
Yeah.
because they had their NBA players and news anchors and NFL and everybody else with the hands up, don't shoot t-shirts got sold.
Yeah. What do they say?
Um,
What do they say? A lie told 4,000 times becomes a truth. I think it's something
yeah,
like
and,
that.
and it
Yeah.
was 10 times fold
Yeah.
4,000 times. Anyway, hey,
I
I want to
think,
ask you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
sorry, getting back on that. Like, I think that, we have to just realize that this is a good perspective, and I didn't really start getting this perspective until I started really getting deep in the weeds with CALFIA, and also like because a lot of what we deal with is law, constitutional law stuff, right? Recognizing your role in the community. You are an agent of the government that has been sworn on behalf of elected representatives to do something for the public that they don't want to have to do themselves. Okay. But at the end of the day, what they want from you, they will get, right? We've seen that through this police reform effort. That's whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, or if it's a bad experiment, what they want from you, they will get, right? And it's on us to oblige them. And so what they're asking us for is more information. If your community wants to know about the shooting, and you don't want to tell them because you're protecting the community's tax dollars, that's not your responsibility anymore. They know what the cost is. They know that the county may get sued or the city may get sued, but they want to know. So you got to tell them, and but I think we get caught in this belief that we are like the fiduciary of the money pot. And it's like, well, no, the money pot, it belongs to the public, and the public wants to know. If it costs them money in the end because we release details about this shooting, then that's something that we'll have to deal with. But it comes from education, I think. And I think also we can educate people on the front end too. I don't think it always has to be after the incident. You can do PIO press releases. You can release videos. You can do videos on your department protocols and how your department responds to mental health issues and considerations and things like that, and release that stuff into the public and teach them.
Yeah.
Show them exactly what you do, right? Like the agency that I work at, we have this Citizens Academy. And I think that's become popular, right? Like teach people what you do and how you do it so that they understand, so that when they see something that they don't understand, or that see something that doesn't jive with them, they at least have some sort of context that they can go, okay, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Hey, I want to get more into the force issues in training about people entering the profession, certification, and the like. But first, I want to take a moment and thank our sponsor. ESOF is a secure, cloud-based pre-employment background investigation software system designed specifically for public safety agencies. Used by hundreds of agencies nationwide, ESOF has been credited with cutting the time it takes to process a pre-employment background investigation by up to 50%, saving agencies significant time, money, and resources without sacrificing investigation quality. For more information, go to esoph.com. That's ESOPH.com. And we're back, and I'm speaking with Joshua Coleman, Vice President of the California Force Instructors Association. We're throwing it around as CALFIA. And Joshua, what kind of help are you getting from the national organizations like International Association of Chiefs of Police, Police Executive Research Forum, police and sheriff's organizations? Are you getting either expert support, financial support? How are they adding into these
Yeah,
discussions?
we
Yeah,
we haven't we haven't really made those connections yet with like perf and I'm sorry, the Chiefs
nice.
Association. We Those are things that I think are starting to happen this year. Perf released a white paper on positional asphyxia. It really wasn't a positional asphyxia. It was on prone handcuffing, prone restraint, which we looked at and had a lot of different thoughts and opinions on it. So those are these issues will crop up, and then that causes us to have to go out and go after it to try to see if we can mitigate that, or you know add our points and thought processes into the conversation. So We're just not there yet. We're getting there. We're on the cusp of those type of networks. And maybe you can help me if you happen to know some people over in those associations. You might be able to put me in contact. I know that we would love to have Chuck Wexler out for a conference. We do a lot of different discussion panels at our conferences. The last 2 years, last year we did a discussion panel on police reform where Riverside Sheriff Chad Bianco was there. University of Southern California professor Dr. Jody Armour was there. He is the opposite, right, of Sheriff Bianco. Like they're on complete opposite political spectrums, but the conversation that was had was very, very interesting because you get to see where people that you look up to and that you would admire as leaders, you diverge in some ways with their opinions, and then people that you would think that you have nothing in common with, you have actually some intersectionality with the things that they believe. So having those big players, big national associations, having some input from those folks and having those people also maybe teach us how to grow would be great.
Yeah, yeah, definitely help out there. And Jason Potts at American Society of Science-Based Policing, Evidence-Based Policing. I'm sure that's a great start. We just had the two guys on, the editors from the APB, the Applied. Uh,
Yes,
yeah, of
I
course,
know it.
the
I know what you're
acronym.
talking about.
Yeah, they essentially put together scientific studies, put them into everyday language that we can understand, and a
Yeah,
lot of them are about force incidents
yeah.
and use of force. So those are great starts. Technology. We talked a little bit about the taser. We talked about the bowler wrap. There's some other things out there. Training wise, are you recommending virtual reality to supplement that real hands-on force training?
So we're trying to nab all stakeholders in the training community. I would say a deficiency in our association right now, as far as membership goes, is firearms instructors. People who I have been a firearms instructor, and there are other firearms instructors in our association, but the there is a really interesting split in force training. And it's not just I thought it was agency specific, but it's not, and it's actually a trend that we see across state of California and across the nation, where within different agencies and within the community itself, there is a split between people who teach control and control devices and people who teach firearms. Like there's like a it's like you're both brothers in the same house, but you're brothers that don't talk to each other, and that's a problem that we would like to fix. um, Ultimately, we believe, from a science standpoint, from a improving decision making standpoint, it doesn't make any sense to continue to train in silos like that anymore. We need to we find over and over again that teaching firearms and only firearms doesn't actually help decision making in real life, because every time you're going to go to the firearms training, or go to the range, you're going to the range. So your brain's already primed for solving problems with your gun. That doesn't translate well to real world decision making. And so like Santa Clara, and I know you know Scott Savage. I don't know if you've had Scott Savage on your actual show, but
Yeah.
Scott Savage eloquently laid out how he was able to revolutionize Santa Clara's training model and move away from silo-based training toward a holistic force training model, where you basically go to training and you don't know what problems you're going to solve that day, and you don't know how you're going to solve them. You just have to learn how to make decisions. So there'll be some concept of teaching skills, interleaving the skills that are taught that day with skills that were taught during another session, giving you a problem to solve that may not have anything to do with the skills that you were taught, and then just causing the brain to have to work so that you
Mm.
can, improve in that way. So that's something that we would like to see, become the model across the state, in addition to um, mandatory, con- you know, controls, human control skills like jujitsu or things like that, across the board. So
Yeah, I know. I've seen, I mean, I was growing up on the FATS machine, the
Yeah,
firearms training simulators. Now the VR is really um, like virtual reality. And
yeah,
sometimes we're outfitted with either in a FATS training scenario, we've got the gun belt, baton, pepper spray, taser maybe, or some other things, and the scenario is played out, and you, like you say, real time choose your weapon, right? And they have pneumatics and other things that'll track you with baton strikes or muzzle control, things like that.
yeah.
And then virtual reality will also do the same thing where you're holding these things and you can, go down and it's like a video game where you go
Yeah.
and click and change your weapon. And so, I know that every force instructor is going to tell you, okay, but there's no way that's replacing hands-on one-on-one. But as far
Well,
as,
there's limitations. So
of course,
I used to work for Vallejo PD, and they had the Virtua machine. And I was taught how to instruct on that. Virtua
yeah.
machine was phenomenal. It's phenomenal for virtual reality, I think, just where it's at right now, where the tech's at right now. And also like simulator technology is good for creating stories, right? So the brain's a story processor. If you don't have the experience, because these incidents are, what do we find? That the people in your department, and you can point to some I'm sure that you worked with, that handle these infrequent high stress incidents the best are people who have been through them before, right? So
Mhm.
if we can create artificial stories that you've been through before to build up your understanding of how to respond in these infrequent events, that's ultimately the goal, right? Because unlike an NFL football player that gets to practice football during the week and then has been playing football since they were in elementary school, you know what it feels like to be hit. You know what it feels like to be tackled. You know what it feels like to do these things because you're doing it over and over and over again. So then when you get to the Super Bowl, you kind of have a pretty good idea of what to expect. Whereas with our business, you can be a person who was in a private sector business, became a police officer, went through training, and went your whole career without ever really having to be involved. Let's say you work for a rural agency and you never had to deal with a gun problem, and then all of a sudden you're faced with a gun problem where you have to solve it with your firearm. You don't have anything realistic to draw from, right? And so
Mhm.
that's the challenge: is how do we use technology, and how do we use and how do we be creative, use a little bit of theater, and create these simulations. Simunitions is good. I've been seeing, from a tech standpoint, like I think there's another company called can't remember it, but they're like a simunitions rival where you can take real guns, or you can buy their gun setups, and you can use guns that cycle and make a small concussion sound but not super loud, so you can use them indoors, and you can fight with them, and then pull it out and use it, but without, there's no projectile, so nobody's getting hit with it, right? So like
Mm.
using, and it smells like gunpowder, it feels like a gun that cycled. All of those things are really great. Like the more that we can get that type of stuff, the closer that we can get to the real thing, then that we can replicate that frequently, the better.
Yeah, no, I love the analogy. So, you have talked to cops up and down the state. What's the biggest complaint? What are you hearing about most, as far as what their resources are, their training level, post-incident investigations? What are you hearing most?
Well, morale is terrible across the nation. I think if you were going to ask me what I think is the most critical issue that working cops are facing, it's morale. And
Mm.
morale, and so then tying that into force, it's all centered around use of force. Like the morale issues are largely centered around, we don't know what to do. We don't know what the public wants from us. We we're being told that, with the AB 392 and the changes to 835, that the public wants a necessary standard. And I'm not saying that that's what what it created, but the public wanted that, right? Like they were very, very, very hot to trot on that with AB 931. Some language got changed, but it kicked out a very, very non-permissive document that clearly lays out what the public does not want from us, right? They want us using all available options. They want us using movement and tactical retreat and de-escalation, but they don't know what de-escalation means. And like, they don't know. They don't know. They know that they don't want us to shoot people, but they don't know what they want to replace that with. And then at the same time, they took away our carotid hold. So officers are faced with like, well, what do we do? And then with paragraph 5 of 835 and a lot of the federal case law decisions surrounding mental illness, we have a diminished interest in using force against people who are suffering a mental health episode. So they have not committed a crime. So then the question is, well, why are we there? And so it's just created these really, really, really large issues in law enforcement across the state, agency by agency, on how do we keep people safe from danger while at the same time keeping ourselves out of jail, right? Like we saw I mean, I'll just say it was not until AB 392 became a bill that passed that I had any fear of going to jail or prison. When I started my career, I was taught if you're doing the right thing for the right reasons and you're not acting under the color of authority, you're safe from criminal prosecution. Yes, you may get sued in civil court for in criminal court for I'm sorry, federal civil court for tactical errors, decision making, some sort of policy issue where it may be, and the department will have to pay out on that. And that's not something that we want. It's not ideal, but there was no fear of going to jail. I mean, did you have any fear of going to jail as a good person working for San Francisco PD? Did you ever think I don't want to do this because I'm going to go to prison? Well, that's a real mind space where officers are working from in the field right now, where they're showing up on calls and they're going, I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to pull my gun out and shoot this person because I could end up being criminally charged and going to prison. Andrew Hall out of Contra Costa County went to prison for trying to defend his life from a moving vehicle that he perceived was speeding past him and going to crush his legs or suffer some sort of serious bodily injury. And he's in prison right now. So it's like that's a hard place to be from. So morale in that way is bad. And then that bleeds over to, do you even want to become a police officer? And recruitment is abysmal right now. Recruiting police officers is the worst than it ever has been because of the public perception of police. So we're working to try to fix that.
Yeah, and it's dangerous. I mean, you're talking about things that might create a sense of hesitancy in a police officer at a scene where, a decade ago, you're reacting to the threat and you use force. Well, now, there's so many incidents of officers trying to defend themselves using force, often, almost always appropriate force. And yet, again, in the last 5 years, we've seen the attack on qualified immunity. And so in some states, that safety net of just what you said, doing the right thing for the right
Yeah.
reasons based on your training no longer protects us. So what are we doing about that as far as making officers feel confident enough to use the tools and the training at hand without them saying that we're going to allow the bad guy to shoot first? I mean, that's the
Right.
worst possible kind of policy.
Right. I mean, it's that those type of that will ultimately end in police officers getting hurt. And the one thing that we forget is that the police officer, deputy sheriff, whatever it is, they're just a regular citizen that has been asked to do something on behalf of the public. So asking somebody to do something on your behalf and then telling them, well, if you happen to have to do the most serious thing on my behalf, you better have made sure that you did absolutely everything correct. Woke up, had an 8-hour night's sleep, ate 3 meals that day, did all these things correctly. Otherwise, we're going to criminally prosecute you. That's just not fair.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're doing good work. You're bringing a lot of important issues to the forefront, and I wish you success in what you're doing in California and across the nation. Thanks for being with us today, Joshua Coleman, Vice President of the California Force Instructors Association.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Hopefully, as issues crop up, we can do this again. I know the United States Supreme Court is getting ready to hear the Felix versus Barnes case probably next month, which is going to really change some of the landscape depending on which decision they make regarding the force standards. So it's going to be pretty cool to see what they do.
Great. And I'm going to post your link in our show notes. So anyone in California, and I'm guessing even outside the state, if they want to join the association, they can.
Yeah, it's a $50 membership fee. Our conferences are about, I think, $375 to come to the conference, but $50 membership fee, get access to the newsletter, get access to the private back page of our website, which all of the instruction videos and links to white papers and things like that are on. Monthly Zoom meetings, first Wednesday of every month. We have somebody come in and do a very quick bite-sized presentation on something. So a lot of value for the money.
Nice. And I remembered it was APB is Applied Police Briefings. They were just on the show. They're going to kill me for not remembering it offhand. And FLETC is putting out the federal law enforcement training in Glencoe, Georgia. A friend of mine, Dr. Laura Zimmerman, just put out a study on force. So that's always a good place to look and see what's being done and what's being analyzed. So a lot of good stuff out there. Keep fighting the good fight, Joshua. We're going to talk again soon.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
All right, take care.
All
Hey,
right,
to our listeners out there, hope you enjoyed listening to Joshua Coleman, Vice President of California Force Instructors Association. Check out the links below. Let me know what you think. Drop me an email at policingmatters@policeone.com. Comment about this show or any others. And let me know if there's someone out there or something you want to hear about, and we will book them and bring them on the show for you. All right, take good care. Be safe. Hope to talk to you again real soon. Thanks for checking in.
Thank you.